We are recording this podcast on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We wish to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be listening.
Hello and welcome to Novel Feelings, where two psychologists take a deep dive into your favorite books. I'm Priscilla.
And I'm Elise. Hello, everyone. We haven't heard from us from a couple of months, to say, but we're really excited to jump back into your headsets with an interview with author Ariane Beeston. So Ariane is a former child protection caseworker and psychologist with New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. She was a staff writer at Fairfax Media's Essential Baby and Essential Kids and has published articles in the Sydney Morning Herald, Daily Life, Babyology and Mamma Mia. She currently works for Australia's peak body in perinatal mental health, the Centre of Perinatal Excellence, aka COPE, as their communications and content manager, and she's also a dancer and choreographer. Her first book, Because I'm Not Myself, You See, has been recently published, and that's the book we're going to be talking about today.
Let us tell you a little bit about the book. Ariane Beeston is a child protection worker and newly registered psychologist when she gives birth to her first child, and very quickly begins to experience scary breaks with reality. Out of fear and shame, she keeps her delusions and hallucinations secret. But as the months pass, Ariane gets worse, much worse. Finally admitted to a mother and baby psychiatric unit, the psychologist is forced to learn how to be the patient. With medication, the support of her husband, psychotherapy, and ultimately time, she rebuilds herself. And she also begins a new chapter working in perinatal mental health, developing resources to support other new mothers. Thank you to Black Ink Books for linking us together.
But before we get started on our interview, our usual disclaimers. So, of course, we are trained psychologists, something we talk about a little bit today with Ariane, but this podcast should not be taken as direct therapeutic advice. Please always consult a professional for more specific and tailored advice. And as Ariane's book is a memoir, we're not going to be doing what we normally do with our author interviews, like separating into spoilers versus non-spoilers. We do talk a little bit about some of the content of the memoir, but please go out and read it for the details of her story. We talk quite high level today. And of course, this interview has been edited a little bit full length.
And for some content notes, today we are talking about topics such as perinatal and postnatal depression and anxiety, postpartum psychosis, inpatient treatment, and stigma.
All right, let's get started on our interview with Ariane.
Welcome to the podcast, Ariane. Thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on the publication of Because I Am Not Myself, You See.
Thank you. It's a bit of a mouthful to get out of your practice.
It's a great title, though. It is such a good title.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's from Alice in Wonderland, and it's perfect. It was I chose it quite early on, and I was very glad. Oftentimes, you hear about writing when people write books, the working title gets changed a couple of times, so I was glad that one it stuck.
Yeah,
brilliant.
It's perfect. You have published articles about your experience with postnatal mental illness in publications like Mamma Mia and the Sydney Morning Herald before. How is this experience different from publishing those articles for you?
It's such a good question, and it's one I've actually been reflecting on a little bit this morning. So I had an article published in The Guardian, and not an extract of the book, but it sort of speaks to some of the themes in the book. And it was actually a really funny kind of reminder of what it was like to first have those pieces published. So, yeah, the first piece that I had published was in Mamma Mia, and it was almost, I think it was about 11 years ago now, and it was written like really in the thick of my illness, and so I think that's a key difference. That first piece was sort of written from a place of this is what I'm going through at the moment, and I don't have a happy ending yet. I'm still trying to find my way through that. And it was, really vulnerable, really raw. I felt like, I had always wanted to be a writer and always wanted to write, but it was the first piece that I'd had published. So there were all these feelings of, excitement, but also there was this real, fear of, for the first time, it was the first time that I'd sort of come out, and I used those words in that way, but that about the fact that I had been so unwell. So yeah, those earlier pieces I think were definitely written from a different place. Obviously my son is now 12, and it's very much, something that I can look at that period of time as being a part of my story rather than being, right in the thick of it. So that's been the main difference, I think, just being able to look at what happened with a little bit more, with more distance, with kind of even that kind of almost clinical detachment a little bit, because I was able to step out of the actual, feelings and experience and sort of look at it with more sort of curiosity and look at the research and
like almost zooming out a bit or having a different perspective. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, there were times where I thought, oh, why did it take me so long to write this book? And I think it took, it's the right time. It took the time that it was supposed to take, because there's something really powerful about being able to zoom out, as you say, and look at it from different kind of lenses, and not be sort of still triggered in the writing and the reliving of it.
But even so, I imagine, it's quite clear in the book how taxing the writing process could be at times as you're going over and reliving these memories again and again, including those where the memories maybe weren't so clear or you had those periods of memory loss. So how is it reliving your story in such a public way?
It's really intense.
Yeah.
It's really intense. And I think, I'm obviously just at the beginning of this sort of journey and this experience. I feel like I quite enjoy this aspect of it, the talking about it and having these conversations. I don't find that as draining or taxing as the writing itself was. I think people kept asking me when I was writing, it must be really cathartic. Is this like really cathartic? And people want you to say, they always expect you to say yes, or they want you to say, yeah, it was really therapeutic and I got so much out of the writing process.
I processed everything and now it's fine.
Exactly. But it wasn't cathartic at all. It was actually at times kind of the opposite. It was, it was literally looking at or going back over a wound and sort of, pushing on a bruise and seeing and kind of going deeper.
I imagine you'll be doing quite a few of these conversations.
But it's such an honor, and I think there's so much, there's so many things that I can talk about with this book, and there are so many different themes. And I think, what is so wonderful about it is that, speaking to you guys, you're psychologists, and so you have that kind of really interesting insight and curiosity around that element of it. But then, obviously there's the kind of motherhood and transition to motherhood aspects of it, and then the child protection aspect. So I think, the beautiful part is being able to have lots of kind of really rich conversations. I don't feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, which is really lovely. So
yeah, wonderful. Well, one of the concepts or topics that you talk about in the book is this idea of, let me pronounce this correctly, matrescence.
Matrescence, matrescence.
We might have looked that up before the interview to make sure we were saying it right. Yes.
Yeah, but reading your book was the first time we heard about matrescence, but it makes so much sense that, motherhood just doesn't happen in the instance that you give birth or become pregnant. But for listeners who haven't read your book or heard about it, would you mind talking a bit about this concept and why it's important to acknowledge?
Yeah, definitely. And I was really interested actually to hear that it wasn't a term that you'd come across. And I think it's definitely a word that sort of has started to gain a little bit more momentum. And thank you very much to the work of Alexandra Sachs, who's a reproductive psychiatrist. So basically matrescence, and I mean, it's such a beautiful sounding word, isn't it? I've always loved words, and I remember coming across it. It must have been because Dr. Sachs wrote an article in the New York Times, and it was basically, I think it was called, On Becoming a Mother. And again, I remember hearing that word and just thinking, what does this mean? And basically, so, it sounds similar to adolescence, right? Adolescence, matrescence. And the idea is very much that, when we go through adolescence, we have those hormonal changes, we have, the social changes, our identity, our body, our kind of place in the world, everything, there's that huge transition. And we navigate that, with awkwardness and, and the fact that we sort of we recognize that transition through adolescence is often sort of awkward and ungainly but when we look at the idea of matrescence, so it's sort of that similar concept of that the transition or that birth of a mother. And again, the fact that we go through those hormonal changes, the emotional changes, our bodies change, our social, where we sort of fit in terms of our friends and our families and relationship dynamics, our relationships change, our bodies change. And yeah, the fact that it is about the birth. You don't just become a mum the minute that your baby is sort of placed on your chest. It's a process. It's a process of becoming, and that similar to adolescence. It's full of highs and lows, and a lot of people don't expect that. And there's that sense. That we should be navigating that period with a smile and looking beautiful and looking as though we've got it all together. And, that's just not the case. And actually, I was looking earlier when I was thinking about it, the term was first mentioned by an anthropologist back in 1975, which I find fascinating. And then it wasn't actually, it's sort of just, I guess, because we don't have, social media and the internet, it's sort of languished in an academic
hard to go viral
somewhere.
in the 70s. Yeah.
That's absolutely right. No one made a pithy, Canva tile.
No TikToks. Yeah.
no TikToks. And so it was a missed opportunity. And so the sort of, I guess, the term languished somewhere in this textbook. And it wasn't until more recently that it was picked up again. But she says in her book back in 1975, she says of new motherhood, the time of giving birth does not automatically make a mother out of a woman. During this process, these changes occur in a woman's physical state, in her status within the group, in her emotional life, in her focus of daily activity, in her own identity, and in her relationships with all those around her. And she says the amount of time it takes to become a mother needs study. So that was in 1975. And then Alexandra Sachs more recently said, when a baby is born, so is a mother, each unsteady in their own way. Matrescence is profound, but it's also hard. And that's what makes it human. And I love that because what it does is, we talk about, obviously my book looks at perinatal mental illness and the sort of range of antenatal depression and anxiety, so during pregnancy, and then the postpartum mental illnesses as well. But what matrescence does is it sort of normalizes the more common challenges. So it normalizes those feelings of ambivalence and, feelings of grief around missing your old life that aren't pathology, right? Like that's not a clinical condition, but it's still something that that women struggle with and that we should be able to talk about.
In Alexandra Sachs's TED talk, she talks about how new mothers were calling her up or seeing her as clients, wondering if they had postnatal depression. And they weren't.
Am I depressed? Yeah.
Am I depressed because I'm struggling, because I'm not bonding as quickly as I thought, or because this is not an easy transition like I think it's going to be. And no, they weren't clinically depressed, but this is what's normalizing it, is this idea of matrescence.
And that's what I love. That's what I love about it, because it sort of provides just this, this way to normalize some of the difficulties, to normalize those feelings of ambivalence, and and to kind of help people. I think what I love about the concept is, and so much about preparation for parenthood and motherhood, I think, is getting that psychoeducation, whatever that might look like through pregnancy. And that can just be education about matrescence and recognizing that these are some of the things that might happen when you have a baby. And if it does, then, that's okay, to be prepared for those things to happen, so that when it does, your expectations aren't completely misaligned, because we know that's such a key thing for people who do experience, postnatal depression or anxiety, that it's because their expectations for what motherhood is going to be like just completely mismatched.
And how we romanticize this idea of motherhood as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so no, go and, for anyone who is listening and interested in it, definitely go and look at the Alexandra Sachs TED Talk, and there's a beautiful article, I think, in the New York Times that also builds on that.
Yeah, we'll link those in the show notes. And also, we, of course, really enjoyed how you discuss what it's like being a psychologist with lived experience of mental illness. And in particular, how your training and knowledge around mental health and well-being might not have actually helped. It's not necessarily a protective factor.
No.
So we loved this quote from your article, not the book, but your article, The Year My Brain Broke. So much of the treatment of mental health issues is trial and error, something I experienced firsthand. It was utterly terrifying to realise on the other side of the desk just how much about the brain and psychiatric illnesses remains a mystery, and the enormity of what we simply do not know. So if you were practicing at the moment in the sense of, seeing clients, that sort of direct client contact, how do you think your experiences would impact your practice?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's one I often reflect on. I think certainly what I found most difficult was that repeated questioning, and I found being asked the same things over and over again, and just how exhausting that sort of whole assessment process is, when you come in, and I think people are often surprised by that you have this expectation that if you're going to go and see a psychologist or a counsellor, that you sort of go in and just sort of start sharing your story, but there's a lot of information gathering, isn't there, first, that happens as part of that assessment before you can even get started on that. And I think, that's such a necessary part of the process, but it can be quite confronting, I think, when you're, if you're already feeling vulnerable and exposed to sort of have to face that sort of barrage of questions. I think, as well, just being honest, I think as a young psychologist, and I think so much of, you often have that imposter phenomenon, don't you, where you think that you need to know all the answers and that you have to know everything, and we just don't. And I think sometimes it is about kind of explaining that we're going to have to kind of travel this path together, and particularly with this is obviously not so much for as a psychologist, but if you are working in conjunction with a psychiatrist or GP around medication, but that really took me by surprise. We might not get it right first go, but it is in terms of the medication and managing the side effects and the combination of medication that you might take, and so I think for me it was just being really honest about that. This is something we're going to figure out together, and I don't necessarily have all the answers, and some things that work for other people might not work for you, and just that sort of openness. I think I really appreciated that when I found a psychiatrist who was happy to say, I don't know all the answers, so we're going to figure this out together, and I don't know how long it's going to take you to feel better. And
I'm sure that honesty was very much appreciated.
It actually really, really was. And it goes to that sort of, that collaborative process of working through something like that together. And I really, really, I didn't realize how much I would appreciate that honesty and transparency. I definitely have more empathy for how hard it is to also to actually get to the point where you're coming into a psychologist or psychiatrist or GPs to ask for help. And I think I perhaps hadn't realized that until I was in those shoes, the effort involved in, and whether it is just looking for researching and finding a clinician online and then making that phone call, making the appointment, getting on the train or the bus or driving, following through and actually presenting to that. All of the work and stuff that's gone into actually getting to that point. is huge.
Yeah.
And that's just, I don't think I'd ever really considered that until I was sitting there in the psychiatrist's waiting room, having gone through all of that. Yeah.
I was really struck by how you were talking about the challenges that come with telling the story again and again and the sort of assessment side of things. One thing I've heard a lot from clients and advocates is the frustration in sharing your story again and again and again, especially in those kind of settings where you are working with lots of different professionals and you're not sort of developing that same relationship with with someone over time. But also the whole sort of questionnaire assessment side of things, which is so common in so many treatment settings. And you speak in the book about, you know, completing the DAS again and again, that kind of thing, and getting to a point where, you know, your answers were not honestly reflecting how you were feeling.
No,
Can you reflect on that a little bit?
Yeah. It was actually really funny to get I requested my notes from the mother baby unit, and when I called, they said, oh, look, we've actually destroyed all of your notes, and it's because it had been longer than 7 years, so they don't have to keep them. And but she did have the discharge summary, so she said she would send that out to me. And yeah, so I look at this discharge summary, and so when I was admitted, I did the DAS, which is the depression, anxiety and stress scale. Also, I would have done the Edinburgh postnatal depression scale, the EPDS. I did the ANRQ, it would have been the PNRQ, which is the postnatal risk questionnaire. And that is a measure that looks at psychosocial risk factors for perinatal mental illness. And then I would have done some kind of attachment or bonding. I can't remember which one it was exactly, but some kind of adult attachment, and also probably the parental bonding scale as well. There were a whole lot of questions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions.
I mean, the researcher in me is like, yes, data, love it. We can demonstrate impact and all that.
You can understand, right? You can understand that in the past, like how exciting, all of this great data, and it's all, it's all quantitative, so it's all easy to kind of, push through. But imagine you've gotten to the point of, wow, I have to be admitted to hospital, and you turn up and it's like, okay, just fill out all of these forms. And when I was admitted, I did answer them honestly. I think by that point it was like, well, I'm here now. Like, what am I going to do? It's not like, know. And so, my scores were very much reflective of that and a sort of severe depression. So the mother baby unit, I was a terrible patient, and I think this is just part of being a mental health professional with a mental illness. I just was a rubbish patient, and once I got in there, I found it really, really difficult. I found it really, I was really ashamed of being there. So we did group therapy, and a lot of it was really basic sort of CBT, mindfulness, circle of security work.
Everything that's old hat to you through your training and your work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I just felt so ashamed. I just kept thinking, this is the sort of work that I was doing in my old life, inverted commas, and here I am. And I was there for, I think, about 3 weeks. But towards the end, I thought, this is not the right place for me. Like I felt like I needed to be back at home, and, I really wanted to get back to work. And so it was a voluntary admission, so I was able to leave. I remember sort of saying, I think I'd like to go home. And so you basically do pretty much the same measures on, which again, as the research, you're like, yes,
but as a person, I'm like completing all this stuff.
Right.
So
and so, it's like you got your pre and your post measures, and that's great. But there I was, and I was looking at this depression, anxiety, stress. I'm like, yep, good, all good, happy, not
I'm
stressed,
cured.
not anxious. I well done, like your program is it's excellent. And and I sort of so when I looked at the scores when I got the discharge summary, and they were so different, so I had come in and it was you know, X, and then on my way out, and it was literally like kind of the opposite, like nothing to see here, you know, all good. It was quite confronting to see that. And I actually had a session, which I talk about in the book, with my psychiatrist, Dr. Q, and I said, oh, look, I got my discharge summary. She's like, oh, yeah. I said, do you mind if I kind of talk it through with you? And I said, I just don't understand. I mean, it's so clear here that I was fudging, that I was, you know, selecting the kind of answers that I knew would look good. Mm. And she sort of said, yeah, but, you know, what were they going to do? I mean, you didn't want to be there. You were ready to go. And there was nothing, I guess, about your presentation at that point that meant that they could kind of force you to stay. And yeah, you sort of, you did what you felt you needed to do. And I sort of said to her at the time, oh yeah, you know, it's quite funny. And she said, yeah, but is it? Because I'm not sensing that you think it's funny. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, all defensive? she said, no, I think you saying that it's funny is actually a defense. And I said, no, I think you're right. And when I think about it, I think there was that sense of, you know, not being seen, of kind of being let sort of slip through the kind of cracks in a way, just because I was so skillful at being able to avoid being, you know, detected and seen.
Well, I get the impression if you had more of a positive experience as an inpatient, you know, maybe you would not have been so desperate to get out of there. Maybe you would have answered more honestly. I don't know.
Yes and no. I mean, I think I was a bit of an asshole on the ward. Like, I was genuinely, like, I was a bit of like, and I have enough sort of, you know, self-awareness, I think, to be able to say that and to be able to separate, you know, my behavior, I guess, in inverted commas, to the program itself. And I think, you know, I was really, I was scared. And so being scared sort of came out in me feeling like quite, I think, a bit hostile to, and not that you would know, I mean, it's not like when I say that, no one would have picked up on that, but it was just my sort of way of, I guess, having some sort of sense of control. And so things like, you know, doing group art therapy, and I was like, I'm not doing art therapy. Like, what's the evidence-based art therapy? Like, what an asshole. So I think it was just what I needed was the right medication, a really skilled psychiatrist who could sort of grip onto me and see exactly what was going on and not let me go under the radar. And I think I'm such a huge advocate for mother baby units. I think they are so important and we don't have enough of them. And I think I was just a really difficult patient. And yeah, I think just going in there and having to, I just felt so ashamed about having gotten to that point that I don't think I got out of it what most people do. And most people will describe going on a mother baby unit and describe it as having, you know, saved their life and changed their life. And I think for me, I can see it in that way, in that it helped me to see that I wasn't the only person going through this. So it gave me a sense
normalizing.
of and sort of finding people who were going through the same thing at the same time. And so that, you know, community of other mums was really important. And also the referral, they referred me to the incredible psychiatrist who I still see today. So in many ways, you know, it was a sort of a necessary part of that journey. I just was a terrible patient.
Well, I think there's that saying, doctors make terrible patients. So, you know, apply to psychologists. Yeah.
I think so. And I've heard even like speaking about, and I think not doing clinical work and moving away from that and working in the area in other ways has given me the freedom to be able to talk about some of those things that I think clinical psychologists or people working clinically don't feel that they have the space to be able to talk about. And so I think it's much easier for me to talk about this. And a lot of psychologists who have mental illness feel like they can't talk about it openly, and because they're worried about what it will mean for their registration or what it might mean to practice. And that's a really, really real fear.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago talking to a friend about not even having a mental health issue, just saying, I would like to see what therapy is like before becoming a psychologist. And
which you should do. Everybody who becomes a psychologist or psychiatrist should do their own therapy.
And in the US, don't they have to do it as well?
I think so, I think it's a huge part of their program is they have to undergo. And in the US, it's usually like psychoanalysis. It's quite intensive, whereas here is actually, it's not a requirement, is it?
It's encouraged, but definitely not a requirement.
Yeah. What I found interesting in that conversation, this friend was actually saying, "Oh, be careful with that because someone might report you to APRA for being in therapy."
No.
Yeah.
No.
But that's the perception, right?
But that's the fear. That's the fear. And even, so I have my registration on non-practicing, and each year I go through it and tick all the boxes and so on. And, it does have something that sort of says, do you have, a mental illness or something that would affect your capacity to work? And it says something like, this does not include, if you have an anxiety and anxiety condition and you are seeing someone regularly for anxiety. And so they do spell that out. But what, there is still, I think you're right, that fear of, well, if I am seeking therapy or support for a mental illness or to manage a mental illness, what does that mean for my ability to practice? But anyone who's working as a psychologist or counselor, go and do your own therapy. It's so important, and it is the most rich experience to know what it's like to be on the other side and to be vulnerable, and it just makes you a better clinician. It's just, I think it's so important. And that's the problem, and I know that this has come up recently. It's fine for us, isn't it, to be able to say, go and do psychotherapy, but it can be these days. It's expensive. It's not something that's necessarily
not as accessible as we'd like.
It's not as accessible as we would like, but it definitely, if it is something that you can do, it's definitely something I think you should prioritize for anyone working in the space, because it just gives you the richest perspective, and the skills that you learn on the other side are things that when you're working with patients, and you'll hear things that you have experienced yourself, or that a trusted clinician has said to you, and they come back to you in that moment, and it just makes you so much better.
I also fully believe, regardless of the therapy side of things, that lived experience is a strength that we bring to practice. So,
I think so too.
I think I'm a better psychologist, even though I'm also not working in a direct client role, but I think I'm a better psychologist because of my lived experience and what I've been through with my own mental health and, my experience seeking therapy and working with other people with lived experience, like advocates and so on. It gives me a different perspective and helps me a lot with empathy. And, I think there's also some power if somebody says to you, you don't know what it's like, to go, oh, actually, you're making an assumption. I do know what it's like.
That's right. And it's really, the lived experience side. And it's definitely a double-edged sword. And I think there are times where, working in perinatal mental health, and most of the time it's such a privilege and it motivates me. And but there are times where, I might read, there's been a few, for example, inquests after maternal suicide and infanticide recently. And I'm not sure whether it's just that I'm more attuned to it or whether there have been more recently. But it's you read these stories about the failures in the system, and they really, they're the things that I find, quite distressing and upsetting. I think, but it is most of the time that lived experience is a very powerful perspective to be able to bring to the work. And
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, slightly segueing away from the psychologist side of things, maybe. So Elise and I are both recently married and kind of at that stage in life where we or thinking about starting a family or
Yes.
families, so separate families.
Not together.
Not together.
We have to be careful when we phrase this because we realize how easy it might sound that we're married to each other. It's like, no, we're just very good friends. We just happen to get engaged to our partners.
Yeah. Like we're engaged to separate people.
Separate families. Separate families.
So it's very interesting because obviously, we are also psychologists like you, and so reading this book, we really enjoy the book and are really glad for this knowledge about perinatal psychosis, but also we're a little bit anxious.
Yes, what if this happens to me, or what if?
Yeah, it's brought up just a few anxieties.
What would you say?
Look,
sorry, go on.
I think it's tricky, isn't it? And I think there's that sense of not wanting to scare new mothers and new parents, expectant parents, but also wanting people to be aware of what can happen. And there's a really delicate balance, I think, in terms of spreading that awareness, but also making sure that people aren't scared. And look, I think it's really important to kind of reiterate that postpartum psychosis is rare. It's 1 to 2 in every 1,000 women. But postnatal depression is much more common. So that's 1 in 7. 1 in 7 women. And perinatal anxiety and depression is 1 in 5 women. So, statistically, if you look around, you're in a mother's group, there is probably someone in your group who will be struggling, and potentially struggling in silence. So I think it's just about being aware of the signs. And I think so much of it too is about, so if you have a history of mental illness, mental health challenges, if you've had a history of perhaps, if you're exquisitely sensitive like I am to hormones, so, your cycle and that sort of stuff as well. These are all things to be mindful of, so that when you are planning your pregnancy or going through pregnancy, and you're sort of aware of what you're bringing to your experience of pregnancy and motherhood, and you can prepare for that. So if you do have a history of mental illness, then that is about your preconception planning. And if you're on medication, talking to your doctor about whether it's safe to continue that medication. And in some cases, it's actually, you do a risk benefit, and it is actually more important to stay on the medication than to come off. It's about that preconception planning, talking to doctor about, medication if it's important, and getting that planning and support through pregnancy, so that everything's set up there as a safety net, and doing everything you can so that, you can, postnatally, if something does happen, if you need help, you know where to get it. You've got your sort of team there, and it's not completely, you're not navigating a system completely unexpected. And so I think it's just, preparation, knowledge is power, having that information, and preparing as best you can. But nothing, I can say that, nothing to be scared of. But I think part of writing the book is that mine and so many women, it goes undetected for so long. And that's what, the tragedies that we hear about, that you often hear about in the news. And it doesn't have to be, because people around you, if people around you are aware and looking out for, in the UK, there's a group called Action on Postpartum Psychosis, Action on PP. And their whole kind of campaign is basically new mums seem strange is their kind of social media or their campaign and their posters and signs. Literally, new mums seem strange, and it has a list of kind of behaviours that seem strange. And to me, that's like, it's such a simple concept, that if someone just acting not themselves, are they a bit odd? And it's not baby blues, which we associate, and with 80% of women will experience that. Is there something qualitatively odd or different about the way that mum's behaving? And being alert to that, and so family, friends, health professionals, so that you can get help. So knowledge is power. And I think, I think for people like us too, who have so much awareness, and it sometimes can seem like it's more scary because we sort of know all the things that can potentially go wrong. But I think we also need to look at that as we also know all the things that we can do for it to be, a different experience as well. So.
Slight tangent. I was chatting to my husband about this book, and I said, you know what, maybe you should read this just in case.
Yes.
Just in case, if this happens to me, postnatal depression or anxiety, I'm actually too good at hiding it myself. Or
I hear.
And
I really, thank you for mentioning that, because I think that's so much of detection is about our partners keeping an eye on us, and it's our partners who know when our behaviour is slightly off or not quite right. That a GP or a psychologist or a maternal child health nurse who we're seeing for the first time, they don't have that comparison point. They're not seeing you and going, oh, you're not who you usually are. That's what you need your loved ones and your support network to be looking out for.
And speaking of looking after ourselves, as two people who've both taken up dancing in the last few years, we really love the sections of the memoir where you talk about the role of movement and specifically ballet in supporting your mental health. So what does self-care mean to you these days? And, what does ballet look like for you these days as well?
It's funny, isn't it? Because when I think about that kind of petulant 20-something-year-old sitting in that art therapy room on the MBU and thinking, oh, what's the evidence based for art? And, why are you asking me to do collages? And the irony is that it was art, it was writing and it was dance that sort of helped to bring me back. And it might not have been colouring or painting on the psych ward, but my kind of own, assumptions about what would help me to get better was, I had really challenged me. And I think, so I had, trained to be a dancer, and then stopped that when I went to study psychology, and then became a mum and so on. And it was when I was sort of floating, I had tried to go back to work and had relapsed, and so was back off. And by that stage, kind of on sick leave, because it wasn't really maternity leave, and was sort of just bouncing around. And and I was dropping my son at school, and I noticed that there was a dance school opposite, and it just sort of felt like, okay, this isn't right. Dug out the old shoes and the leotard, and went back to the studio. And it was honestly one of the best things that I could have done. I think when I think about it, it gave me, there's something about dance that is so, it takes you out of your head and it puts you completely in your body, and you're focusing on the music, and you're focusing on the position of your hands and your arms and your head. And so it completely took me out of my head and kind of, it was completely grounding and gave me that other way to, I guess, to express myself and to find myself, or to help me find that old me and bring back those elements of the old me before I got sick. And then over the last few years, I had an opportunity came up to do some teaching. And so I started teaching preschool and toddler ballet and adult ballet beginners, and that has just been the biggest joy. It's just been so good to me. And I think just such a powerful way to share my love of something, or share my love of dance, and to give back in the community in that way as well. I always feel like I'm always smiling when I talk about it. It's so
I love that it brings
me.
so much joy. That's just so.
It does. It brings me
good.
so much joy. It brings me, and it's, I continued to teach while I was writing the book, and that was, I think, such an important outlet as well, just to know that, okay, I'm having a rough day with this, but I'm going to be in the studio for an hour and I'm going to be with these women who, these beginner adults who are just so much fun to teach, and they have so much fun. And that hour I would always come away thinking, okay, I've got this, or kind of helping me work through those knotty issues as well, problems. So yeah, they've given me so much. I think I get more out of teaching than they do, to be honest.
It always seems to me like dancing as an adult is more fun than dancing as a child.
I think so.
Yeah, it's that lack of, like, as an adult, you can just enjoy the movements and you don't have to worry about the technical skills of it. Or
absolutely, it's letting go of the perfection, I think, and it's the difference too between obviously training for something vocationally and then as an adult. And I have this amazing class of women who are, the three of them are probably over 60 and sort of retired or they're semi-retired, and there's just this beautiful sense of we'll just give it a go, like if I tell them to do something, like we'll just see what happens, and that sense of just we'll just give it a go, we'll just see what happens. It doesn't have to be perfect.
And finally, a question that we ask all of our interviewees: do you have any book or author recommendations that you would like to share with our listeners?
You know what? I was looking this morning when I was thinking about this, and Oliver Sacks. I have this beautiful, and it's funny at the moment, I'm finding, having written this book and edited and now going through this process, I can't read. Like, it's just something that I cannot read, and I'm buying lots of books and they're just kind of stacking up. I still buy books. But I feel like it's going to take me a little while for my brain to kind of get to the point where I'm able to read. I'm sure it'll come back. But one thing I did pick up was this beautiful, it's called Gratitude by Oliver Sacks, who's the beautiful neuroscientist, wasn't he? Neurologist. And he writes so beautifully about, he wrote the man who mistook his wife for a hat. And some, other beautiful memoirs and so on. And this one, so Gratitude, is this tiny little book of essays that were published. I think they were all published in the New York Times just before he died. And they're just such a beautiful reflection on, what it's like to be human and what it's like to kind of be at the end of your life, and reflecting on writing and music and love and being loved. And it's one of those ones where even when I'm not able to read, it's something I can just pick up and go, I can read one essay, I can read one. So I think so. It's Gratitude by Oliver Sacks. It's just a beautiful little collection of essays, and they're also available on the New York Times. But it's just it's one that I sort of go back to.
We'll put a link in the show notes for it.
Yeah, it's really, really lovely. He's such a beautiful, elegant writer as well, and especially for people who are interested in psychology and the brain and the mind and its quirks. Someone to always go back to. And
amazing. Well, that wraps up our questions for today. So, Ariane, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for such insightful questions. It was really, really lovely to talk about some different things as well.
Oh, wonderful. So good to have you on the pod. And that wraps up our interview. And of course, just to flag that we will include those links and recommendations on our show notes, which are on our website. So the links to the TED Talk and Ariane's book recommendation.
If you like us, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on novelfeelings.com, and the best place to find us on social media is Instagram or on the Storygraph.
You can also find my bookstagram paved with books with an extra S at the end. It has suffered due to some exciting life events, but it's still there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to Ariane for joining us today. Catch you next time. See you later.
See ya.